Hello, creepers. Before we dive in, hit like, subscribe, and drop in the comments. Where in history should the zombie outbreak hit next? Now let's get to it. I was hauling timber when it started. The dock smelled like salt, tar, and wet wood. My hands were already raw from the rope, shoulders burning as I helped drag another beam toward the longship's ribs. The hull groaned as we set it in place. Men shouted measurements. Someone laughed. Gulls screamed overhead. It was work. Honest work. The kind that leaves your muscles aching, but your head clear. I remember thinking about my son. How he'd asked the night before when he'd be big enough to help me down here. I'd told him soon, knowing I was lying. Then the screaming cut through everything. At first, it sounded like an argument. Sharp, angry, normal. I looked up expecting fists, maybe knives. Instead, I saw a man on his back near the fish tables, legs kicking uselessly as another man bent over him. The one on top wasn't striking. He was biting. I froze, a heavy wooden mallet still in my hands. Teeth sank into flesh at the man's neck, and when he screamed, it wasn't anger. It was terror. Wet. High. Wrong. Blood sprayed across the planks and ran between the boards into the water below. Someone shouted to pull him off. Someone else ran. The biter was dragged away at last, clubbed across the back. He went down hard, skull cracking against the dock. I thought that was it. The man who'd been bitten convulsed. His body arched so hard I heard something pop. Foam bubbled at his mouth. Then he went still. A numb pause flickered in my chest for half a heartbeat, and it sickened me immediately. He sat up. His eyes were wrong. Empty. Fixed on nothing and everything. He lunged for the nearest man, jaws snapping, fingers clawing like hooks, teeth tearing skin and spraying blood across the planks. Then he turned toward me. There was no time to reach for anything else. I swung the mallet into his chest, smashing wood into bone. It should have dropped him. It would have dropped any man I'd ever fought. He barely slowed. He crashed into me, weight dead and heavy, mouth snapping inches from my face. I shoved him back and swung again. Bone cracked. Blood sprayed. Still he came. Panic tore through me, hot and sharp. I swung for his head. The mallet connected with a dull, meaty sound. Bone burst apart under the blow, blood and gray matter spraying my arms as his skull split. He collapsed at my feet, twitching as thick blood pooled beneath his head. I stood there gasping, staring down at what I'd done. Around me, the dock exploded into chaos. More screams. Another man went down near the boats, bitten and dragged under. Someone fell into the water and didn't come back up. A longship pushed away half-manned, oars striking bodies instead of waves. I saw another one rise, then another. Men ran, dropped tools, slipped on blood-slick planks. The air filled with the sound of splintering wood, screaming, and the wet crunch of teeth. This wasn't a fight. It was a collapse. I backed away from the body at my feet, heart hammering so hard it hurt. My hands were shaking, slick with blood that wasn't mine. My wife and son were uphill, in the village. Another scream tore out of the streets beyond the docks, echoing between the longhouses. I didn't look back again. I turned inland and ran. My lungs burned like they were full of fire. The path uphill was already clogged with bodies moving in every direction, people screaming, tripping, shoving past one another. I didn't slow down. I couldn't. Blood slicked my palms and streaked my forearms, drying tacky in the wind as I barreled through the village. Someone slammed into me from the side. I almost went down. I shoved them off without looking. Ahead, a woman stumbled and fell. Before she could scream, hands dragged her backward into the dirt. Her legs kicked once, then her mouth filled and went quiet. I kept running. The sounds were wrong, not just screaming. Wet tearing, bones knocking together. A low animal noise coming from throats that shouldn't have been able to make it. An infected burst from a doorway to my left. It hit me hard enough to spin me sideways. Fingers clawed at my chest, digging for purchase. Its mouth snapped inches from my face, teeth clacking together like tools dropped on stone. I drove my shoulder into its ribs and felt them cave in, bones snapping wetly under the impact. It staggered, coughing blood, but didn't fall. I grabbed its head with both hands and smashed it into the wall of the longhouse again and again until the skull split and it slid down, twitching. I didn't stop to look. The village was collapsing around me. People poured out of longhouses, some already bleeding, some dragging children by the wrist. Others never made it out. Doors burst inward, and bodies piled in the thresholds, infected tearing into anyone who slowed. I saw a man pinned in the mud near the well, an infected straddling his chest, hands locked around his throat. His wife was screaming, trying to pry it off him with one arm while clutching a baby to her chest with the other. I slammed into the infected from the side and drove it off him, tackling it hard into the mud. I pinned it there, forearm across its throat, as it thrashed and snapped inches from my face. The man didn't hesitate. He was on his feet in a heartbeat. He brought the butt of his axe down onto the infected's head. Bone cracked. It got back up. I snarled and shoved it flat again. He struck a second time, harder, until the skull split and the body went still. He looked at me, shaking. "Thank you," he said. I nodded once. I saw Hrolf near the well. I'd drunk with him 2 nights before. He was holding his arm, blood pumping between his fingers, shouting for his wife. He dropped. Before anyone could reach him, his back arched. His shout turned into a choking noise. Then he was up, faster than he should have been, and he went straight for the man who knelt beside him. I didn't shout. I didn't warn anyone else. There was no time. The street narrowed and the crush thickened. Bodies pressed in from both sides. Something grabbed my leg, and I went down hard. The breath punched out of me. Hands clawed at my back, my shoulders, my neck. I rolled and kicked blindly, felt teeth scrape leather, felt fingers slip. I drove my heel down into a face and felt the skull collapse like rotten wood, teeth and blood bursting outward under my boot. Another set of hands grabbed my hair. An axe flashed in from the side and chopped the fingers clean off, blood spraying as the grip fell away. I got up covered in blood that wasn't mine. The man who did it drove the axe into the infected's chest. It kept coming. "Destroy the head!" I shouted. The axe rose and came down again, and the skull split. The body dropped. I gasped out a thanks. The man didn't linger. "Head for the Great Hall," he said. I nodded. Fire bloomed ahead. A longhouse roof went up in a rush of sparks as someone inside scrambled with an infected. Smoke rolled into the street, thick and choking. Animals broke free from pens, pigs squealing as they barreled through the chaos, knocking people and infected alike into the dirt. I pushed through it all, eyes locked uphill. My house. Every step felt slower than the last. My legs shook. My vision tunneled. Still, I ran. I rounded the last bend and saw it. My door was already under attack. 3 infected slammed into it in unison. Wood cracked. The frame bowed inward. Splinters flew with every impact. Another body joined them, clawing and biting at the planks like an animal trying to dig through earth. I could hear my son screaming inside, I didn't think. I didn't slow. I lowered my shoulder and charged. The door gave way. Infected flooded inside. Inside, the longhouse was already a slaughterhouse. My wife stood between our son and the center of the room, feet planted, spear slick with blood. An infected lay at her feet with its throat pinned open. Another was climbing over the table, mouth wide, fingers clawing. She didn't look surprised to see me. She never did. I slammed into the one on the table, shoulder first. We went down hard, benches flipping, bowls shattering under our weight. It thrashed like an animal, teeth snapping inches from my neck. I drove my forearm across its face and felt cartilage give. It kept coming. My wife's spear punched down into its skull. The tip sank with a wet crunch, splitting bone and spilling blood across the floor as the body went slack. Our son was crying. High. Panicked. Alive. Another infected burst through the inner door. I grabbed it by the neck, pinned its head to the wall, and drove my elbow into its skull once. Bone cracked. The body slid down, twitching. Blood coated the floor. It soaked into the rushes. The air was thick and hot and wrong. No time. Something slammed into the door behind me. Then again. Shadows crowded the cracks. Nails clawed through gaps in the wood. My wife met my eyes. "You need a weapon," she said. I crossed the room and tore my axe from the wall. The weight settled into my hands like it belonged there. My shield came next. The moment I strapped it on, something inside me locked into place. The door shattered. They poured in screaming. I hit the first one with the shield and felt ribs cave inward with a wet crack, breath and blood bursting from its mouth. The axe followed, biting deep into its skull, splitting bone and spilling blood as it dropped in a heap. Another took its place. Then another. I smashed the shield up into a jaw and felt teeth shatter and spray across my arm. My wife stepped in and drove her spear through an eye, twisting until the skull split and dark blood poured down the shaft. A third crashed into me. I hacked sideways and opened its face, bone and blood spraying across the wall. A fourth grabbed for our son. The shield caught its throat and crushed it flat, cartilage popping, and my wife finished it with a hard thrust that punched out the back of the head in a burst of blood, bone shards, and gray matter. The fifth came screaming. I buried the axe deep and tore it free, leaving the body to fold in a heap of blood and shattered bone. I grabbed our son by the collar and hauled him with us as we burst out the back of the house into the street. Smoke rolled low between the longhouses. People ran uphill in clumps, breaking apart as infected slammed into them from the sides. "Up!" I shouted. "Don't stop!" We ran. The village was a killing ground. Bodies lay twisted in doorways. Some moved, some didn't. Infected spilled from alleys and between buildings, drawn by sound and motion. A narrow path between two longhouses turned into a choke point. 3 villagers went down in front of us in a blink. One tripped on a body, and an infected tore his throat open, blood spraying the wall as he kicked and went limp. Another tried to help him and was dragged sideways, face smashed against a doorframe until bone burst and his head caved in. The third turned to run and got tackled from behind, hands locked around his jaw and ripped, teeth snapping and blood pouring as he screamed once and was silenced. I took the front. Shield first. I drove it into a chest, shoved, chopped. Heads split. Teeth flew. Blood sprayed hot across my arms. My wife stayed behind us, spear darting in and out, stabbing and yanking free in practiced rhythm. One lunged past me and reached for our son. I felt the pull at his cloak. I buried the axe in its head, splitting the skull open and ripping it free in a spray of blood and shattered bone. Fire roared to our left as a roof collapsed inward. Burning infected staggered out of the flames, clothes and hair alight, skin blistering and splitting as they still came for us, shrieking and clawing even as fire ate them alive. Heat blasted my face. On the right, a fence gave way under the weight of bodies. Animals burst through the gap, goats and pigs crashing into infected and knocking them down. We used the opening and kept moving. My breath came in ragged pulls. My arms burned. Something warm ran down my side. I didn't look. The hill stretched on forever. Through the smoke, the great hall loomed. It stood above the village like a promise. Survivors converged on it from every direction, screaming, bleeding, dragging each other uphill. Behind us, the noise swelled as infected gave chase. Two broke through the smoke. I hacked sideways and took an arm clean off the first. It staggered screaming, blood pumping as my wife stepped in and drove her spear through its face to finish it. The second grabbed at my shield. I hooked the axe under its collarbone and dragged it down through chest and throat, peeling it open. My wife stomped its head flat, bone and blood bursting under her heel. I tightened my grip on the axe and shoved my family forward. "Almost there," I lied. We didn't slow. Every step burned. The ground was slick with blood and mud, bodies trampled flat under the stampede of survivors, clawing uphill. The great hall loomed above us, its doors already open, men screaming for people to move faster. Women and children were dragged inside first. Hands reached out, grabbing arms, hauling bodies through the doorway. My wife shoved our son forward and didn't look back until he was gone. "Go," she told me. I turned and joined the line. Shields locked shoulder to shoulder just outside the doors. Wood rang against wood as they slammed together, a living wall forming in seconds. Axes and spears worked over our shoulders, striking down into the crush. Arrows hissed overhead from the steps and upper beams, thudding into skulls and chests. Infected fell and were trampled under the next wave. People ran toward us screaming, blood-soaked, dragging children, clutching wounds that already meant nothing. We opened gaps just long enough to pull them through, then closed again as infected slammed into the line. I braced my shield and felt the impact travel through my bones. An infected climbed over another's back, and I chopped its leg out from under it, hooked the axe down through its neck, and shoved the body aside as my shieldmate crushed another's face flat. A spear punched past my ear and pinned one to the ground. An arrow took another in the eye. They kept coming. A man in the line saw his brother break from the slope, running for his life. He shouted his name. "Eric!" 3 infected hit his brother at once. They dragged him down and tore into him, hands and teeth working together, ripping flesh and breaking bone. The screams cut short. The man snapped. He surged forward in blind rage. 3 men grabbed him, trying to hold him back. He dragged them several steps before wrenching free. He reached his brother as the body convulsed. The infected were still on him. He went to work. He hooked one with his shield and crushed its knee, then chopped down through the neck while it fell. He spun and buried the axe into another skull, ripped it free, and used the weight to drive the blade into a third face. Blood sprayed the dirt. Bodies dropped. His brother sat up. The man froze for half a breath. Then his brother lunged. More infected poured in, and swarmed them both. The hall filled behind us. I could hear it, crying, coughing, sobbing, the sound of too many bodies pressed into one space. Then I saw them. A family far down the slope, father carrying a child, mother running behind, screaming. Dozens of infected poured after them, faster than anything human should move. "Archers!" someone shouted. Arrows fell among the horde. One dropped, then two. The rest didn't slow. Men on the line shifted, tried to push forward, tried to reach them. The family ran. The child fell. The horde hit them like a wave. Bodies vanished under grasping hands. Screams cut off mid-breath. Bone cracked. Blood sprayed across the dirt. No one spoke. We could only watch, helpless. We pulled back. Step by step, shields still locked, we retreated into the hall. The doors slammed shut behind us. Heavy timbers dropped into place, thudding home one after another. The last man inside screamed as fingers scraped the gap. Then the sound was gone. The doors held. For a moment, no one moved. Breathing filled the hall. Ragged, broken. Someone vomited. Someone prayed. Someone laughed and then stopped. I leaned against my shield, legs shaking so hard I thought they'd give out. My wife found me through the crowd. Our son was pressed between bodies, eyes wide, alive. Outside, the noise didn't stop. It grew. Fists hammered the doors. Bodies slammed into the walls. The hall shuddered, dust drifting down from the rafters. The sound rolled across the village, echoing between burning longhouses and empty streets. More joined it. From every direction, infected poured toward the noise, drawn by the sound of life trapped inside. The Great Hall had become a beacon, and they were coming for it. The Great Hall shook, not once, not twice. Constant, a living drumbeat of bodies slamming wood, fists and skulls pounding in waves that rattled the beams overhead. Dust sifted down from the rafters and stuck to sweat on my face. Every impact carried through my shield and into my teeth. Outside, they were everywhere now. Not scattered, not roaming. Gathered. Drawn by the sound of breath and heartbeats trapped behind timber. Arrows hissed down from the roofline and upper beams. Spears stabbed through the gaps whenever a hand or face pressed too close. Infected fell, piled, and were climbed over. The horde thinned and refilled in the same breath. It wasn't holding. It was buying seconds. Chaos boiled inside the hall. The doors shuddered with every impact. Beams groaned overhead. People shouted over one another, fear snapping into anger. "We can't stay," someone yelled. "It won't hold." "I can distract them," a man shouted from the press. "Pull them off the doors." "And then what?" another voice shot back. "We retreat to the docks. Boats," someone said. "If we can reach them." A few heads turned. A few nodded. Desperation made the idea sound possible. "How?" someone demanded. "He'll be dead the moment he steps outside." "To the roof," another man said. His voice cut through the noise. "We throw hooked ropes onto the nearest roofs, slide across, draw their attention, drag the horde after us, away from the doors." Murmurs of agreement rolled through the hall, low and grim, men nodding to one another as the choice settled in. "I'm going too," another voice added. Then another. That decided it. The plan came together without more words. Men with speed and no fear fixed ropes to beams and iron hooks, casting the lines outward toward nearby roofs. Berserkers grinned, like they were already dead. Someone muttered a blessing. A hand slapped a shoulder. A fist struck a chest. They launched themselves out and slid hard across the ropes to nearby roofs, boots skidding as they landed, shouting and striking to pull the horde uphill after them. The effect was immediate. The noise shifted. The horde peeled away in chunks, bodies turning uphill toward fresh motion and fresh sound. The pressure on the doors eased just enough to move. "Now!" someone shouted. We ran. Downhill this time. Faster. Sloppier. People poured out from the hall and spilled into the streets, tripping over rubble and bodies. The ground was slick with blood and ash. Smoke burned my eyes. I looked back once. The berserkers were already being swallowed. One was dragged off a roof, screaming until his spine snapped. Another vanished under a pile of bodies, axe still rising and falling for a few heartbeats before it stopped. The diversion was collapsing faster than it should have, faster than anyone had hoped. The noise followed us. The fleeing crowd became the new lure. Infected turned downhill in a black wave and came after us, feet hammering dirt and stone, mouths open, arms reaching. They hit us halfway through the village. People went down screaming. Some were pulled apart where they fell. Others were trampled and vanished under boots and bodies. Blood painted the walls and ran in the ruts of the street. I took the rear. Shield up. Axe working. I cut legs out from under them and let momentum finish the fall. I hooked a collarbone and dragged down, opening throat and chest in one pull. My wife moved ahead of me, spear darting back whenever something slipped past, finishing what I broke. A longhouse ahead burned hot and bright. The roof gave way without warning. A beam crashed down and crushed the man in front of us. Flat fire and bone exploding outward. The street vanished under flame and rubble. We skidded to a stop and turned hard into a side path, losing ground, losing seconds. "Go," I told them. The path narrowed into a choke point between collapsed fencing and stone. I turned and planted my feet. They came at me in a rush. I used the shield like a door, slamming it forward to stop one, stepping through to split another's knee, dragging the axe back to open its belly. I ripped an arm free and used the body as cover while I crushed a face flat with the rim. Blood sprayed my legs. Teeth snapped at nothing. I didn't count kills. I counted space. When my arms finally failed me, I broke free and ran. Around the bend, my wife was already fighting. 3 infected pressed her hard. I slammed the shield into one and knocked it flat, then split its skull with a short, ugly chop before it could rise. Another rushed her. I caught it mid-step, buried the axe into its neck, and wrenched it sideways while she drove the spear through the back of its head to end it. We ran again. The docks opened up below us in fire and screaming. Boats shoved off under attack. Hands clawed gunnels. People were dragged into the water and vanished under thrashing bodies. Infected swarmed the planks, overturning hulls, piling onto anything that floated. We weren't going to make it. The noise pulled the horde toward the shoreline. While they fed and drowned and screamed, we slipped sideways into the shadows and forced our way into a nearby building, bar slamming into place behind us. Inside, it was dark. Still. We pressed together and listened as the docks died. We knew they would come back. Silence settled over the docks. Not peace, not safety, just the absence of screaming. Smoke drifted low between blackened beams and overturned boats. Nearby, the water washed against docks slick with blood and debris, carrying bits of flesh, broken oars, and the proof of what had just torn through this place. We were still trapped. My wife leaned against the wall, spear across her knees, chest rising and falling. Our son sat between us, knees pulled tight, eyes fixed on the door. "What are we going to do?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. My mouth was dry. My arms felt hollow, like they'd been scooped out and left to ache. "We move," I said. She shook her head. "How?" she asked. "They're everywhere. They'd slaughter us the moment we step out." "We wait for them to scatter," I said. "Use the cover of darkness. Run for the forest." "So we move before the sun rises," she said. Then her brow tightened. "But winter is almost upon us. We'd die out there." "Not if we reach Raffenvik before the first snow falls," I said. "So we move now." She looked past me, jaw clenched, fear plain on her face. I stepped closer. "I won't let anything happen to you, or to him," I said. "Not while I'm breathing." She nodded once. I looked at her for a heartbeat longer than I should have. Dirt and blood on her face, eyes steady, and still thought she was the most beautiful thing in the world. We searched the building in silence. A sack of dried grain, a skin with water still inside, a knife, cloth torn into strips, nothing else worth carrying. Everything else felt like weight. Night crept back in. I stood watch while they rested, or tried to. Outside, infected wandered through the wreckage. Some dragged feet in slow, aimless circles. Others went still, slumped against walls or sprawled in the dirt like broken men. They didn't sleep. They just waited. My son shifted closer to me. "Father, are you scared?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He frowned. "I thought you were brave." "Being fearless doesn't make you brave, my son," I said. "Having fear and the courage to conquer it for the things that matter does." I took the sayax from my belt, a short blade worn smooth by years of use, and pressed it into his hands. "This was given to me by my father," I told him quietly. "Now I give it to you. Take care of it." He nodded and closed his eyes. Pre-dawn came slow and gray. I rested my forehead against theirs for a breath. "Stay close. Do exactly what I say." We slipped out. We moved low and slow. Careful, quiet. Every step measured, every breath held. Bodies bent and close to the ground as we slipped through shadow and wreckage. We cut between hulls and collapsed racks, boots slapping wet wood and mud as the docks fell away behind us. Something went wrong. A shape lurched out of the dark ahead, then another from the side. They had scattered, but not enough. Not fast enough. I slammed the shield into the first infected and kept moving, the impact throwing it sideways into a post. My wife stepped past me and drove her spear through another's face without breaking stride, ripping it free as we ran. One came in low, grabbing for our son. I hooked it with the rim of the shield and dragged it down, axe coming across in a hard, chopping arc that split the head open and dropped it in our wake. 3 infected burst from a structure up front, sprinting straight at us. I hurled my axe. It spun once and buried itself in the first one's head, splitting the skull open and spraying blood and bone fragments as it dropped mid-stride. I clotheslined the second one with my shield, its head hitting the ground hard, and I stomped down, the skull collapsing with a wet crunch as brain matter pushed out beneath my boot. The third lunged. My wife tore my axe free from the first corpse and threw it in its chest, the blade punching through ribs in a burst of blood and knocking it flat. I stepped in, yanked the axe loose, and smashed the butt down into its skull. The bone caved in, and the head burst apart. The ground began to rise. Mud turned to roots and stone. Trees closed in, branches whipping at our faces as we burst into the forest. They followed. One caught up on the slope. I spun and drove the axe into its skull, ripping it free as I shoved the body downhill into the others, buying us seconds. Another crashed into a tree, tangled in roots, and my wife finished it with a thrust that pinned it there as we fled past. They lost us in the trees. The terrain worked in our favor. We didn't run straight. We cut hard left, then right, zigzagging through roots, rocks, and low ground where their speed meant nothing. They overshot turns, slammed into trees, and piled into each other when the ground dropped away. Their noise scattered. Screams broke apart, coming from different directions instead of behind us. We kept changing direction, never giving them a clean line to follow. By the time the sky began to pale between the branches, they were no longer on our trail. We didn't stop running until we were certain they were gone. We reached the edge of the forest as the ground fell away beneath us. Below, Hrafnvik, another village lay spread along the coast, or what was left of it. Longhouses burned in scattered pockets, smoke rising in thin columns that bent with the wind. Infected moved openly between buildings and along the docks, unchallenged, their screams carrying faintly uphill. This place hadn't just fallen, it had been eaten. My wife stared down at it, horror breaking through her calm. "The gods have abandoned us," she whispered. "We are doomed." I agreed without saying it. The only salvation left to us lay below, and it looked less like rescue and more like hell waiting with open hands. I looked at my wife, her eyes bright with tears she refused to shed, then down at my son, shivering and exhausted in the cold. Guilt settled heavy in my chest. I had failed them. I looked back down at the village again, defeated, and that was when I noticed something moving. I crouched low and scanned the shoreline. A boat. It rocked gently near the waterline, half shadowed by a collapsed pier. The hull was scarred but intact, water slapping softly against wood. "Odin might still be watching over us after all," I said, pointing toward the shoreline. "There, that boat still looks seaworthy." She stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "Have you gone mad, my love?" she said. "That would be suicide." "You know we can no longer stay on this island," I said. It was the only chance we had. Staying inland meant being hunted until winter finished what the infected didn't. Starvation. Cold. She shook her head, eyes fixed on the ruined shoreline. "Even if we reach that boat," she said, voice breaking, "where would we go? Look at that place. What if the next one is just like that? Or worse?" "We can't give up," I said. "Skeldarvik lies far enough from here, isolated. There's a chance this curse hasn't reached it yet." She took my arm, her voice firm despite the fear. "You are stubborn, Ragnar," she said. "Just don't lose sight of us." "If I lose sight of you, I lose everything," I said, looking into her eyes, my thumb resting under her chin. We moved along the forest edge, slow and bent low, keeping trees between us and the village. Every step was deliberate, every breath controlled. Infected passed close. Too close. One staggered by not 10 steps away, dragging a broken leg, head twitching as if listening. We froze. My son's fingers dug into my belt. I could feel my wife's breath against my shoulder, shallow and silent. The infected lurched on without turning. We moved again. Bit by bit, we edged along until the trees thinned and the ground opened ahead of us. Open space. Mud and stone sloped down toward the shore. No cover, no path, but straight through. "This is it," I whispered. We broke from the trees. Screams erupted instantly. Heads snapped toward us. Bodies turned. Infected poured from between buildings near the docks, drawn by movement. We ran. I took the front, shield up, axe ready. My wife stayed tight behind me with our son between us. The first infected hit hard. I smashed it aside with the shield and split its head without breaking stride. Another lunged low. The sole of my boot met its face, the force snapping its neck. Body writhed violently when it hit the ground. My son stumbled. Hands caught his cloak and yanked him backward. I turned and tore the infected off him, slamming it into the ground and caving its head in with the shield rim until bone and blood spread across the mud. My wife speared another to the back of its head, the spear punching out through the eye socket with the eye skewered on the tip, shoving our son forward again. We didn't stop. The shoreline exploded into chaos. We had the attention of the whole horde now, infected spilling out of longhouses, crawling from doorways and pouring between buildings, their screams stacking behind us as our breath burned and our legs grew heavy. But we kept running anyway. 5 infected emerged ahead. I met the first with my shield, sending it backward into 2 others. As the 3 scrambled up, I punched the first with my shield and sent it farther back, then hacked the skull of the second. The third lunged, mouth open. I jammed the axe handle into its jaws and twisted until the jaw tore away, then headbutted it to wrench the axe free. The first finally closed the distance, teeth nearly sinking into my shoulder, but a spear flew past me and impaled it straight through the nose. The remaining 2 went for my wife. She buried her knife up under one jaw, tore an arrow still sticking out of its chest, and drove it through the eye of the last one. The boat was just ahead now, so close I could hear the hull knocking against the shore. I reached the water first and turned, planting myself between the boat and the horde. Infected surged in from all sides, clawing at the hull, snapping at my legs, piling over one another. "Get him aboard!" I shouted. My wife hauled our son into the boat and worked the line. I hacked, shoved, crushed. A head split. A jaw shattered. Hands tore free and slapped uselessly at the water. I drove bodies back with the shield and buried the axe wherever bone showed itself. They closed in. Teeth snapped inches from my face. Fingers clawed at my arms. One got past me and went straight for my wife, unaware of what was happening. I could only watch as they grappled. Then a knife sank into the top of its head, driven by 2 trembling hands. My son. I finally broke away and sprinted to the boat, grabbing my wife and son. I shoved the boat free and dove in after them. The horde tumbled into the water, thrashing and reaching, dragged under by their own weight as the boat pulled away. The shore receded. Screams faded. Snow began to fall. Light flakes drifted down as the burning village blurred behind us. Fire and death swallowed by distance and water. We didn't look back. The crossing was slow and punishing. The wind cut straight through us, sharp as a blade. Spray froze on my beard and hands as I rode, muscles screaming with every pull. Snow fell thicker now, soft flakes melting against skin and turning to ice. The boat creaked beneath us like it was as tired as we were. My wife held our son against her chest, wrapping him in her cloak and her arms, sharing what little warmth she had left. Through the snow, a shape took form. An island. Lights flickered behind wooden walls. Smoke rose straight into the gray sky from chimneys that hadn't burned out. As we drew closer, details sharpened. Palisades, watchfires, Men moving along the walls with purpose. No screams, no infected. Only silence, tight and watchful. A shout carried over the water. Weapons lifted. Bows bent but did not loose. I raised one hand and stopped rowing. We drifted the last few lengths under their eyes. They let us land. The gates opened just wide enough. Spears tracked us as we passed through. Inside, people moved with quiet urgency. Faces hard. No panic. No relief either. Just survival. Snow fell heavier as the gates closed behind us. I looked back once, toward the sea and the burning world we had left behind. Everything beyond these walls was gone. If we were going to live now, it wouldn't be by escaping what came next. It would be by enduring it.